It's now early September, and by Christmas I will have reached out to Torleif Teden for a cello lesson on Schnittke's second cello concerto. That would have been very ambitious if I hadn't played this piece already, but I have been practicing it. It's just now I'm starting to put this structure around this particular project. Yeah, I will prepare the piece and ask him for a lesson on it by Christmas. I'm not going to say have a lesson on it because his availability is not under my control, but I will have sent him an email or something. I'm Ragnhild. In 2010, I was studying music at the Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. I was at the time preparing the first cello sonata by Alfred Schnittke, which was my first meeting with Schnittke's music. I loved the piece. A fellow cello student told me to also check out his other compositions for cello. That thought hadn't occurred to me, content as I am with what I have at any moment. But I went home and I listened to the two cello concertos written in 1985 and 1990. The first one was great, I thought. Really cool. But after I'd listened to the second concerto, I had no recollection of what I had been exposed to for the past 45 minutes. I just had a vague feeling that there had been something beautiful happening near the end of the piece. And for some reason, I revisited the last movement, the fifth movement. And it was indeed a beautiful piece of music. I listened to that movement many times, and I felt like starting from the fourth movement and listened to the last two movements, so I did that for some time. The fourth movement was pretty easy to listen to, I thought, so I added the third, then the second, until I was listening to the whole piece every day. I enjoyed how I had to struggle to make sense of it. There was something in the piece that to me reflected the world, the craziness, the struggles, the pain, and that there was a way beyond all of that. During the process of composing the first cello concerto in 1985, Schnittke suffered a stroke, was declared clinically dead, but he came back. He finished the concerto and continued to compose until his death 13 years later. So it's not so surprising that I heard something in his music that took me not just to the darkness of living, but even through it and beyond it. It was absolutely therapeutic for me to listen to his second cello concerto from 1990. I decided I wanted to learn to play the piece. I wrote an SMS to my teacher, Nicholas Jones. I was in my second year of my bachelor's degree, and most teachers would maybe have preferred that their young student would spend time on learning the standard repertoire. But my teacher said yes. I don't even know if he had heard the piece. There was no cello part, no piano reduction, only the orchestral score. That summer of 2010, I was in Berlin, and in Dussmann I bought my own copy of the orchestral score published by Sikorsky. At the start of my third year, I started to learn the cello part. I decided to start with the second movement, because that was the movement that seemed the most challenging to me, both technically and musically. I felt I could relate to the music by that time, but the second movement was still a musical mystery. The opening theme was strange. The exposition and development were strange. It was all just hard to get, and that was what I also loved about the piece. I loved memorizing atonal music. Memorizing music had always been easy for me, and to this day I perform from memory if time allows. But memorizing atonal music meant for me I had to make a personal connection with the music on another level from memorizing the type of music that comes for free. There are only so many times you need to hear a classical piece of music until you can sing it, and hear it in your mind. And atonal music is not like that, for me anyway. With Schnittke, I would memorize some of the cello part, then sit down with the cello and try to play it. I didn't play directly from the score since the print was so tiny. I would go on a walk with the score, read and internalize the solo cello part while walking. I found that to be easier than to sit on a chair indoors. But the memorizing was not the biggest challenge. The second movement turned out to be pretty challenging to actually play, and it was such a long and laborious movement I got very tired. I thought at times that it was too ambitious for me to learn the piece, as it took me months to get the second movement, only 1 out of 5 movements. But I got to the point where it was time to move on to another movement. I chose the 5th, because it seemed like the second most challenging one because of the length of it, the duration, and also because it was my favorite. It was a lot easier to play than the second, and my optimism returned. Maybe I could play the concerto in the concerto auditions in my final year. After the 5th movement, I went to the 4th, which I guessed was the 3rd most challenging of the movements, and then it was just the 3rd and 1st movements left, the slow ones, and a lot easier to both memorize and execute. I remember when the time had come to memorize the 1st movement, which I had saved for last, since it's short and easy to play. It was the summer before my last year in Manchester. I was at my mom's house in Norway, and I only spent 2 days on it. I felt thrilled. All I had to do now, before the concerto auditions later in the year, was to practice the piece. My teacher was incredibly encouraging and supportive, which I'm grateful for until this day. But as the concerto auditions approached, I realized I would have to play without piano accompaniment, since there was no printed piano part. I asked one of the composition teachers, who was also a pianist, but he said he couldn't do it. However, I asked another composer pianist, David Horn. He borrowed my score and said he could accompany me. We had a couple of rehearsals, him playing from the orchestral score, turning pages all the time, and taking notes in the music, pointing to motifs here and there. It was truly impressive what he was doing, reading a symphony orchestral score, 45 minutes of atonal dystopian postmodernism, so that a bachelor student could have piano accompaniment for the preliminary round of concerto auditions. I made it to the finals, where I got to perform the whole concerto in the concert hall of the college with David Horn on the piano. And that was the first chapter. I didn't get to play it with an orchestra, but I felt very happy nonetheless. Summer holidays came. I went on to study in Amsterdam, where I played Schnittke's second sonata, which I honestly think is an even stranger piece than the second concerto. But the second concerto was hibernating. I had other things to think about. I moved again from Amsterdam to Tromsø in the north of Norway, then to Hammerfest further north. In 2018 I moved to Stockholm, got a job cleaning flats. But in early 2021 I quit that job and decided to at least try to be a cellist for a living. And Schnittke's second concerto is calling me again now. I would really like to play it with an orchestra. How can I do that if no one knows me or knows that someone in the world is passionate about this particular piece? As far as I know, it has been recorded by 3 different cellists so far. First, in 91, only 1 year after the piece was composed, it was recorded by Rostropovich, to whom the piece was written. It was also recorded by Alexander Ivashkin, who had Schnittke's handwritten score, if my memory is correct. I had a lesson with him at Goldsmiths in London only a few years before he died. Also, already in 92, Thorleif Thedéen had recorded it. The first 2 cellists have both passed away, but Thedéen is going strong. At 60 years old, teaching and performing, and he happens to be a Swedish cellist. I live in Sweden, so I decided to prepare the concerto again which is itself quite a task actually. And then I'll contact him and ask him for a lesson on it. Life is short, why not?